All right. Well, it's my pleasure to welcome onto the podcast Dan Gelok. Dan, thanks so much for taking the time out to talk to us, and welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So, I wanted to jump right in and kind of talk to you about what it is that you currently have going on. What's up in your world, and kind of what brings you to the saxophone world at large.
Okay, yeah. Well, sure. Like everybody else, I've got like 1,000 irons in the fire.
Right. Right.
I've got. I just finished the semester. I teach at the University of Houston. I
Okay.
am the professor of saxophone there. I am predominantly a classical player. Do a little bit of jazz. I actually use summers to focus in on my jazz playing.
Okay.
During the school year, there's a lot of gigging that I'm doing. I do a lot of new music, so some avant-garde stuff, some traditional stuff, a lot of quartet playing. But yeah, so the semester just ended, so I am currently reintroducing myself to my family
Nice.
and getting, getting to catch up on sleep and stuff like
Of
that. But
course.
my big project right now is I run Houston Underground, which is the largest uh, amateur saxophone competition in the
Oh,
country.
cool.
We've got, yeah, it's great. We've got I think we've got 32 quartets.
Wow.
There's a junior high division and a high school division, and we would have more, but we literally ran out of space. We go
Wow.
from like 8:30 in the morning till about 5:30 at night, and it's just go go go. And we've got about 60 plus soloists, most of whom are high school kids.
Wow.
And the way that's organized is that they have to play either the first movement of the Creston or the first movement of the Haydn Sonata or
Okay.
the last movement of tableau, and then they can do whatever they want. So there's like
Oh.
a standard that they've got to reach
Mm-hmm.
to get in to compete, and then we give them cash prizes. And there's it's sponsored by D'Addario and by Van Doren and a bunch of other groups, and so
Wow.
it's a lot of fun. Yeah, so that's I'm in the middle of the logistical like nightmare of organizing all of that.
Right. Now, how many
Yeah,
years has that been going on for?
this is our 10th year.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Yeah,
Very cool. So, did it take you a long time to? Now, I didn't even know this existed, but this is really, really
yeah,
interesting to me.
yeah.
How was the building process for something like this? I know
Oh yeah.
one thing that I really enjoy is I talk to a lot of saxophonists and educators from Texas, and it
Uh
seems
huh.
like Texas really has their stuff together. You know what I mean? They
Oh man.
produce a lot of great musicians, and it sounds like there's just a plethora of opportunities for young musicians to do stuff like you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty massive. I mean,
Yeah.
it what it is that there's a really great band program
Yeah.
set up. Like, if you want to, you can route it all the way to marching band, I
Okay.
suppose, because there's lots of marching bands. There's lots of competition. Obviously, football's huge in Texas, but
Right.
what has happened is that they've established these really great band programs, and
Mhm.
so and the schools are immense. So it's not
Right.
uncommon to have 300 kids in your marching band or what have you. And so music ed started to spread further downwards, meaning that like when you get to like seventh grade and sixth grade, and when the kids are just picking up the instrument, the
Mhm.
training at that level started getting really good.
Cool.
So people are getting started in a really good way. When they
Mhm.
get to high school, they do like the region band auditions, and so like around Houston, for instance, there's got to be 6 or 7 different regions in just the Houston area alone, and so
Right.
each of those would have between 30 to 60 saxophone players, and they're all playing these Farrelling etudes and state. And so, since there's so many people and the band programs are so big, I mean, pedagogy for all the instruments is pretty impressive, and
Right.
saxophone's been really reaping the benefits of that. So,
That's really
yeah,
cool.
that's actually why I moved to Houston to begin with.
Okay.
I knew when I I got married right before the last semester of my master's degree.
Okay.
And then by February we were expecting, so we're like, oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I need a job, and
Right.
so we moved down to Houston. My
Okay.
wife is a violinist, and she went to Rice University, and so we knew the area. And I knew that um, if I needed to make some money, and I couldn't get any band director positions or anything like that, what I could do is come down and just teach private lessons, because
That's
at
great.
all these schools have these band programs, and it's pretty much a requirement to do private lessons.
Wow.
Yeah, if you're in the top band. So I came down. I think within the first month, I had 65 ish students. These are all
Wow.
half-hour lessons.
And in the first month, you
Yeah,
had
yeah.
that
So
many.
yeah. I mean, I was pretty
Wow.
aggressive. I mean, I had to put some
Right.
food on the table, right?
Of
So,
course, of course.
yeah, yeah. So, but it was fun because you get in there, and some kids are into it, and some of them are not so
Hmm.
much. But the fact that you have so many kids at each of these high schools and junior highs that are just getting into it and discovering it, and you're
Right.
working on decent repertoire with them, and
Hmm.
it's a really good situation down here.
That's pretty incredible. So, what a little bit more about your history? Where did you go to
Yeah,
school? Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school?
sure.
All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, okay. I was born in Jersey,
Okay.
and then we moved to Michigan. I was in Saginaw, Michigan for a while. I started playing saxophone at this itty bitty Lutheran school,
Okay.
and my band director was also my fourth grade teacher,
Oh
or
wow.
fifth grade teacher. Let's be accurate here. And he
Yeah.
was the choir teacher, and so he had a book with fingerings, and he's like, yeah, all
Yeah.
right, do that. And he give you some private attention periodically, but I really liked it, and I
Cool.
moved we moved to Indiana right before my eighth grade year. Got
Hmm.
involved in a really great band program down there, good marching band, and decided I wanted to be a band director.
Cool.
So I went to school for music ed, went to Indiana University,
Oh
and
great.
yeah, I studied with Otis Murphy. Otis has become a big name in classical since then, but he was a TA at the time.
Oh
So I
wow.
was I was I was his first student, really, and so that was cool. Got to study with David Baker while I was
Wow.
there.
Yeah, great. I was going to say
David,
the lineage at Indiana is pretty
it's
legendary,
pretty
you know?
pretty hip. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Oh no, and David was amazing. And I didn't have to take a lot of jazz while I was there, but I was interested, and I was
Hmm.
doing I mean, I was in a rock band like the time I was there. I had an established band. We were like playing at bars and
Cool.
stuff like that. We had some originals, but it was like this blues rock thing, and I was always playing saxophone, and I was really interested in it. And so I took Baker's like his jazz 101 class, his
Cool.
improv 101 class, his jazz history class, which was largely him just sitting around and telling stories.
Right. That must
And
be
that was
amazing.
it was awesome. It was
Yeah.
terrific. It was awesome. But the improv class was just amazing because he basically, I mean, he took a bebop approach to
Hmm.
improvisation, and so he's like, all right, everybody needs to learn your chords. You need to learn how to play it. Also, you need to memorize like they had us memorize like 20 heads in that
Wow.
class. It was really intense, and so people ended up just dropping like flies, but then
Yeah.
just continued to like be in the class, and so you could be there. So they weren't going to get a grade for it,
Right.
but that really opened my mind to things. And I did a bunch of the jazz bands while I was there.
Cool.
So I got a music ed degree, and by the end, I was like, I've just now started to learn how to practice. I started really getting serious like my junior year.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you know how it is.
Hmm.
And so I thought, well, I want to, I want to see if I can focus, if I can specialize. Still planning on being a band director.
Okay.
So I auditioned for a few schools, and I ended up doing a master's in classical playing at UMass Amherst with
Oh,
Lynn
cool.
Klock.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, and he was wonderful, and that was just a great time for me there, just getting to focus and practice. And he was great on how to practice. He was
Right.
great on how to approach music, like with common sense and phrasing, and just keeping your brain turned on.
Hmm.
Is really big on chamber music, and so we did a lot
Right.
of quartet, and I got a huge love of quartet from him.
That's
And
great.
so when I moved to Houston, I was looking for something for students to do at the end of the school year because they have like solo and ensemble, so they play their solos, but that's in like February or
Right.
maybe March, and so there's like nothing to do for 2-3 months. And so
Hmm.
so we started Houston Underground then, even before I was working at the university, just for people to have something to do.
Cool.
And so, yeah, started as a quartet competition, added some solo stuff later. But yeah, so in a nutshell, that's me.
That's great, man. Yeah, I grew up in northern Massachusetts, so
Oh, no way.
I had the distinct opportunity of working with Lynn Clark a couple times at chamber festivals, and he was just incredible. I mean, he was at the time the most serious saxophone player I'd ever met in my life.
Yeah.
And he would come into these high school festivals where a lot of people could say, "All right, these are just high school kids. I'll go easy on them." And man, he was not easy on us, and
Yeah.
he really opened my eyes to, all right, this
Oh,
is going to take a lot of work.
Yeah, yeah. Where were you from? Like, what city are you from?
So I was from Haverhill, Massachusetts, and
Okay.
I still
Yeah.
live pretty close to there. But yeah, I mean it's about an hour and a half away from Amherst, so we got a
Yeah.
little bit of the guys from out there. We'd drive down there to check stuff out. They would come up
Uh-huh.
and do clinics for us. It was really wonderful.
Oh man, that's terrific.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, no, Mr. Clock was he was like a dog with a bone
hmm
when it came time to make sure that you understood that there was a standard.
yeah,
I did the I remember one year I was doing the Days and Clo, Prelude, Cadence, and Finale, which starts on this really low, quiet, low B,
hmm
and it's got to be real quiet, it's got to be real gentle. And I walked in, he's like, "All right, go ahead," and I went, "Huh," and he's like, "Stop." And that entire lesson was on the first note,
yeah,
the first note of the piece, and it was great because it made me realize, oh wait, like it actually has to be good. It has to be right.
right,
It can't be like
right,
ish. And
yeah.
so yeah, I got a lot of my how I teach. I steal directly from Lynn Clock.
That's
So
awesome. So continuing
yeah,
the lineage of Lynn Clock, I love that. So that
absolutely.
kind of brings me to why I wanted to have you on the show today is your approach to pedagogy. I mean, so the kind of the nexus of where I discovered you as a player and a teacher was actually on your Instagram page. So
Yeah, yeah.
anybody out there listening, you've got to check out Dan's Instagram account. He does these little short snippets, as a lot of you probably know. You can only upload 1 minute videos to Instagram,
Hmm.
but the amount of information that you can get across in that 1 minute always really, really inspires me. It gives me a lot of stuff to think about. So before we get into specifics, how did you decide to start using like Instagram as this
As a medium,
teaching
yeah.
tool? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. So, I hate social media.
Okay.
Just straight up hate it.
Okay.
Like full disclosure here, I hate it. All
All
right.
right.
And I was talking to a buddy of mine, and we were catching up. A good friend of mine, and he does a lot of work with CNC machines, like
Okay.
molding
hmm
and just products. He runs a holster company,
Oh wow.
and yeah, what he was doing is, and I'd caught up with him, and I hadn't talked to him for a few years, and he
hmm
had started this company, and he said, "Oh man, you got to get an Instagram," and I'm like, "Why would I do that?" And he said, basically, what he does and his MO, and I basically steal his MO. He said
hmm
he goes through and he finds little tricks on how he's like, I got to make this 90-degree cut with this material, this plastic or whatever it is, and so I'm using this, and he'll go on and he'll make videos. He sort of moved away from this recently, but like
Okay.
he'll go on and he'll basically do tricks on how he's using these brother machines.
Wow.
And like he'll basically show, and so people will call him and say, "Hey, I need to make this mold that I do this with," and
Yeah.
totally different industry.
Wow.
And my friend will stay on the phone with him for a while and basically explain what to do. But he'll, when it comes time to sell something, people
Yeah.
will be right there because they've already got a relationship with them. And
Right.
so he's made a lot of business, but his MO was basically just giving away all his information about how to
Right.
do this stuff on his Instagram page.
Wow.
So,
So that
yeah.
kind of brought you to it, gave you the idea of like, all right, let's go on and educate the Instagram community.
Yeah, I mean, and like it took me a few moments to get on and sort of figure out how it was and how
Yeah.
it works and how it's different from Facebook. And I'd gotten rid of my Facebook like
Okay.
a year previous to that, and I was like, all right, I'm done with this.
Right.
And so I pulled off, and I was telling my friend Andrew, I'm like, I don't want to do this, and he goes, it's going to connect you with people, and
Right.
there's going to be a real connection. There's going to be a lot of people on there to do it,
Yeah.
and so just get on and just give them a video of you practicing or whatever. And so I said,
Right.
okay. And after doing it for a little bit, I started thinking, all right, what I could actually do is sort of try to truncate the stuff that I do and just
Right.
sort of make it as compact as possible and give them information on how to practice or how to understand these things.
Right.
And
Well, that's
so, and like
incredible,
you
man.
said,
I'm glad you're doing it.
thanks, man. Yeah, appreciate it. It's hard because it's like when you got 60 seconds, you can't waste any time in any
Right.
space. And so you got to get to the meat of the material real fast, and that's
Exactly.
been really good for me, I guess,
Yeah.
as an educator, as a teacher. Like I want to be able to identify what's going on with people and help them get to the next level as fast as I can. And
Right.
I mean, honestly, I give away everything that I can think of. So
Right.
it's
Of course.
the only difference of like studying with me, and I guess this is a pretty big difference, is that I'd be telling my students, my private students this, but I'm also giving diagnosis. Like I'm
Right.
looking at them going, okay, you are doing this, and it would be better if you did that. Like, and I can't do
Exactly.
that with like, an Instagram audience.
Of course, but it's just such a huge thing to even, feel like you're in a room with somebody else, even though you never have been. And
Yeah.
I guess case in point with the social media stuff. I mean, that brought us to this interview today. So you are
Yeah. Right
definitely
on.
definitely reaching people, and I always love it because I see some of my other favorite saxophone players in your comments saying, "Oh, thanks so much, Dan. This has really,
Uh,
improved everything I'm doing." So it's great, man. Kudos.
Thanks, man. Yeah.
All right, so let's get down to maybe some specifics. Dan did a really great series a couple weeks ago at this point on voicing and overtones, and ultimately leading into Altissimo and a lot of sound concepts in there as well. And that's kind of what I wanted to dig in with you today. Is your approach seems so pragmatic, and it's not just kind of like jump around and do all these different kind of things. So I guess what I really wanted to get into is kind of your method for it. So let's say that I'm a saxophone player. I'm just kind of cracking the books on overtone series, the concept of voicing,
Yeah.
kind of in a quest to maybe eventually be able to play that beautiful altissimo and gain control of the horn. Really,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
what's your like square one point with a student who's never done anything like that before?
Right on. Okay, so normally what I'll say is that like I kind of break it down into four different elements that we have, like
Okay.
parts of our body and things that we can do that change your tone.
Okay.
So I say like, and if I'm working with a kid, I'll ask them like, all right, what do you do? What do you change about yourself? I'm not talking about reed or mouthpiece or anything, and I have them
Mm-hmm.
think about it for a bit. And I boil it down to what I do with my airstream, which is obviously most important, right?
Yep.
Wind instrument, yeah. So, and then what I do with my lips, so your embouchure,
Okay.
and then what I do with my teeth as well, because that sort of matters. Like how much mouthpiece am I putting in, or how much like is my chin forward or back, and like how much is my teeth providing the push that pushes the reed up into the mouthpiece that makes that embouchure.
Okay.
And those three are pretty easy to get to. And then I talk about the tongue, and the tongue is the hard one, and the tongue is the one that deals with voicing.
Okay.
Sort of as a caveat, I don't. A lot of people talk about like throat and stuff, like
Mm-hmm.
what to do with your throat tones. And I've never really found that to be super helpful. I
Okay.
always say like, if they want to think about like an open throat, I always ask them like, okay, well, think about your back teeth, like your molars, and just either yawn and spread them open, or think about having like a walnut or a jawbreaker between your back teeth.
Okay.
And when you do that, I'm like, what just happened to your throat?
Mm.
Well, it's open, and so like, yeah, but I can't tell you to like half close your throat.
Right.
We don't really have that articulated control over it, but I can control my jaw, and that kind of controls my throat. And other people might have totally different approaches, and that's fine. This is the way that
Right.
I take it.
Of course.
So we start with that. Like the tongue position is that one thing that's like super hard to get to, because like I can't see inside your face
Right.
and
Right.
you can't see inside mine.
Mm-hmm.
So and this is tricky, but uh and at this point I'll have people say, all right, so we gotta focus on what it feels like when we're doing different things. So like if I were like, if the kid's really young, what I'll do is I'll have him play like a middle D on the
Okay.
instrument, but I'll have them do it without the octave key. And so I'll say, all right, take like blow the high note, and then like drop down.
Okay.
And they won't use the octave key at all. So they'll start without the octave. They'll play it high and then they'll drop low. And I'll say, all right, you can feel the difference, right? You can feel the difference between like what the high note feels like and the low note feels like. And even if you were like totally deaf, you could tell just by feeling whether the note came out high or came
Mm.
out low.
Mm-hmm.
And that for me is the starting place of everything. That's voicing. That feel that you can't describe perfectly. Like when you get into overtones, and like how does an F off of a low B flat, when you
Mm-hmm.
overblow a low B flat, how does an F feel like the next B flat up, and how does it not feel exactly like it? And you
Okay.
can't really describe that to somebody, but you can
Right.
feel the difference in yourself. So I'll have people say, all right, so let's focus in on that, like that mouth feel. Like, what
Okay.
exactly does it feel like? What response are you getting from the instrument? What resistance?
Hmm.
Like, I think about it like, where does the almost it feels like I'm aiming my air through separate tubes.
Right. Oh
Like a
yeah, that's
higher
a
note will
great
come out.
visual.
Yeah, so like a higher note will come out up here, and a lower note will come out in the middle, and the very
Hmm.
low notes come out at the bottom. And I can tell if the air is not coming out at the bottom, that I'm not playing the low note properly.
Right. And I think that's such a hard thing about like introducing this to somebody is there's no set in stone way to tell somebody to think about it. It's so much about
Right.
experimentation, and
Oh
it's
yeah.
also such a frustrating thing to practice. I mean, speaking from personal experience, I've never been very good at it. Just recently have I started to develop the type of control that I would have liked to have had all along, but it's
Nice.
really just because it's so frustrating. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So how do you overcome that? I mean, how do you
Yeah.
get a student to actually practice this stuff, especially like you were saying, maybe a younger student? Is there any type of exercise that's maybe a little bit more fun as well as it's beneficial?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So again, I think about like with teaching, it's sort of
Hmm.
customize. You got to customize everything with
Right,
an individual. That's why
of
like
course.
one-on-one lessons, one there you're never going to be able to play replace one-on-one lessons.
Right.
Like online stuff is great. Stuff we do on Instagram or on
Hmm.
YouTube. There are a bunch of great YouTube channels.
Right.
That's all wonderful. But like sitting in a room with another player, like a kid, an adult, doesn't matter. Like, and just being able to get inside their head and say, all right, you're having trouble with this, or why don't we try this? And like you just said, with voicing, there's so much experimentation. I've developed like 20 different approaches,
Okay.
which I'll tell you all of them right now if you want. But
Yeah.
yeah, but and it just depends on what works with different people. So like with
Right.
younger kids, I'll say things like, let's start by just walking up the instrument without the octave key.
Okay.
So we'll play a D and we'll go like D D E ah E ah. Then we'll go E flat E ah E ah, and then
Hmm.
E ah E. And the higher it goes, the harder it gets. And I'm like, all
Right.
right. So the higher it goes, I'm like, and I'm asking, I'm like, what does it feel like when you're playing the high notes? Like you know what it feels like when it comes out right. So if you can get out the high B flat, but you can't get out the high B, you got to try to imagine what it's going to feel like. And so, and
Mm.
I just have them do that as a warm up. And I say, do this like literally just walk up and down maybe
Okay.
once a day,
Mm.
just so you can get started with it. You know, it's not, you don't need to spend a long time on it.
Right.
Just mess with it and focus on the stuff you can do well. And
Okay.
then we try to clarify it a little bit as it goes on. As kids get older, they can start doing straight up overtones. But
Right.
the things that I find that are actually the most useful for getting people to like get into how the overtones work and how Altissimo works,
Hmm.
there's like two tricks, and one of them has to do with pitch bends with the tongue, and the other has to do with like using a wedge and actually putting it into your F key.
Okay.
So I'll start with that one. So like what you do is I'll take like a piece of paper and I'll it's hard to do this with just audio. I'll do it visually. So if you're watching this on
Yeah.
YouTube,
Cool.
you can watch me, and if you're watching this on a podcast, we'll go home and get it on go check it out on YouTube. What I'm doing is I'm just taking a piece of paper,
Yeah.
just a regular piece of paper, and I'm folding it up, and it's a strip maybe an inch wide, probably less, and I'm folding it over itself several times
Hmm.
so that what I've got at this point is just a piece of paper that's rolled over 9 or 10 times.
Okay.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that and I'm going to put it into my F key. This is a trick that I got from Eugene Rousseau book, High Tones,
Ah,
and
yes.
he puts it in his F key. And what you do at that point is you play a low G sharp,
Okay.
and lo and behold, a low G sharp does not come out because you've basically just forced that F key open, right?
Right.
And so you start playing it and you're like, well, I'm trying to get this G sharp out, but this other high note doesn't come out. And you say, okay, cool. We'll aim for that other high note. Like, don't
Mm.
aim for the G sharp, aim for the high note. And immediately you start realizing, oh, wait, I know what it feels like to aim for a high note versus aiming for a low note.
Ah,
Like I'm holding G
interesting.
sharp, but I can feel like, oh, this note wants to come out. Okay, let me just change my focus. And the note that wants to come out, I'm going to want it to come out. And all of a sudden
Okay.
you're aiming your airstream properly. And
Wow.
then you move up to an A, then you move up to a side B flat, and this is where it gets a little squirrely. What you've just played, a G sharp actually is an E,
Okay.
an A is an F, a side B flat is an F sharp, and so at that point, if the kid doesn't have an F sharp key,
Hmm.
they've literally just played a side like an Altissimo F sharp.
Right, right.
Without realizing it, they've just done that. Then the next fingering is a bis B flat plus your side B flat at the same time.
Yep.
And that's the G. And normally I don't tell them what they're doing. I'm just like, all right, just do this. Use an air attack. Don't use
Yeah.
your octave key. Just aim at it. Aim at it. Go up higher. Go up higher. Okay, you just played an Altissimo G. And they're like, what? And I'm
Wow.
like, do it again. They're like, oh, so that's what that feels like. And I'm like, yeah, bingo. That's exactly what it feels like. Now
That's
just do that like a million times.
right, right. Well, that's incredible
Um,
what you just said, because you said that's what it feels like, and that's got to be
yeah,
the important part. You know what I mean? Like teaching
that's
somebody
it.
to actually feel where those notes slot and how they would like to come out is going to be way better than teaching them 25 different fingerings for an Altissimo G, but not actually knowing what
Yes.
it feels like.
Yes, and that's exactly it. So, like, if you're listening and you're struggling with Altissimo, the answer is not getting a different fingering.
Right.
The answering is that you don't know what you're aiming for. And I would say this. Let me add this. The most common problem with Altissimo is that people are trying to use their teeth when they're supposed to be using their tongue. And so the
Okay.
reason we do overtones is that, like, you know that one spot where, like, when you're trying to overblow a B flat and get that middle B flat out, or like
Mhm.
you're overblowing a D and getting that A out,
Yep.
there's like this massive threshold right there that people
Right.
can't get across. The main thing is that when they're doing that, their tongue is basically just sitting there flat. And like
Okay.
when you're doing overtones, and really when you're doing honestly most of what you're playing,
Hmm.
your tongue has got to get the shape. It's making like a Y shape. And I
Okay.
mean, like when you say, like, I have my kids, I like say yellow and say the beginning yeah, that shape.
Right.
So the shape your tongue makes, yeah, it's like your tongue is like touching, and this is getting real technical, but like your tongue
Yeah.
is like touching like the roof of your mouth up there, and
Hmm.
it's touching like the insides of the molars.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And so like when you're doing that ye, like that's how you make the shape of the Y syllable, the ya.
Okay. Okay.
And the thing is, people just they're not doing that. The tongue
Right.
is just sitting there. And so you got those four things, like the teeth and the lips and the air and the tongue. It's
Hmm.
like three of them are doing like 95% of the work, and the tongue is just sitting there doing nothing.
Right.
But when you start doing this right, when you start doing the overtones, the tongue is starting to pull its own weight.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you're redirecting things, and you unlock this ability to just change your pitch and control your tone and
Right.
play Altissimo and all this extra stuff. So like most of the time when people are playing Altissimo, they're just chewing really, really hard. They're using their
Right.
teeth to bite. And that's a really super common problem.
Yeah.
And you know what? At first, that's fine. You know, just go ahead and play it, get the
Mhm.
notes out. But as you get better and better at it, try to bite a little less and aim with your tongue a little bit more, and
Right.
that's how you get through that threshold.
So there's so many things to unpack in what you just said, but I want to stick with the tongue thing, because I
Mhm.
know, like, throughout my years of practicing overtones and just like getting stuck on one. So for instance, like
Yeah.
I got stuck for a really 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 long time on the double B flat, and
Yep.
could not get the D, like the palm key
Uh,
D, out.
Yep. Yep.
And it was literally like, I'm sitting there trying to do everything I possibly can without biting down and manipulating the tongue and the shape of the throat, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
do you have any advice for people? But I remember for me, it just wouldn't work. And it was like
Yeah.
banging my head against the wall. Do you have any tips for people
Yeah.
on like different ways to think about manipulating the tongue? Like you had talked about with the Y. Is there
Absolutely.
anything else in the same vein as that?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing that I would say is that when you're doing overtones and you're experimenting,
Mhm.
I would say that like at the beginning there is no wrong. Like
Okay.
just freaking do it. Like if they're like, "Oh, don't bite." Well, go ahead and just do it until it starts working right.
See what
Like,
happens. Yeah.
yeah, my basic principle with all this stuff is that if you can do it, whatever it is,
Hmm.
then you can learn how to do it right.
Okay.
Like, so if I'm getting this D out above the double B flat,
Hmm.
but I'm biting the living snot out of my face,
Yeah.
but I'm getting it out, then I can say, all right, well, I'm getting it. I'm not doing it perfectly,
Right.
but I'm just going to work on it a little bit. And after days or weeks or whatever, I'm going to get so that I'm not pinching or I'm not biting.
Right.
I think a lot of times people are so afraid of doing it wrongly from the beginning
Hmm.
that they just totally shoot themselves in the foot. And that's, yeah, it's not necessary. All right. So specifically with what you're saying right there,
Yeah.
the idea of a cat hiss, like
Okay.
going, like that,
Mm-hmm.
or like what I'll do is, and I don't know how well this audio is coming across,
No,
but
it
like,
sounds great.
all right, this is I think Joe Allard did some of this stuff a
Mm-hmm.
long while back, but the idea of you ricocheting the airstream off the roof of your mouth,
Okay.
so you're going like that,
Yeah.
or and then when I change my overtones or when I do my pitch bends, it'll go. And so my tongue is getting closer to the roof of my mouth and
Mm-hmm.
further away.
Okay.
And again, this is like one of those things where with some kids and some adults, this is going to work. And for some of them, they're going to be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And
Right.
that's
Right.
totally okay. There's a real difference between like mechanics, like what am I doing with my tongue and my jaw? And I've got to put my lip out a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And then mouth feel, which is like, oh, it feels like this. Just aim for that feeling. Um, Mouth feel, I feel, is more important. But like if you're
Okay.
thinking about the cat hiss thing, that's going to be helpful. Um, Keeping the tongue high and more aiming the airstream off of the roof of your mouth, that's going to be helpful too. I sometimes think of it almost, I feel like the airstream is going so high, it's almost blowing out through the bridge of my nose when I'm
Oh,
playing some of those
interesting.
things.
Okay.
So, and that's a visual that works for some people,
Mm-hmm.
like maybe 10%, and the rest of them not super helpful. So, whatever.
Okay.
The other thing that I would say for exactly that issue, you getting stuck on a certain level and you can't go above,
Mm-hmm.
is the idea of crawling up by half step. So like, let's say we started by like one that's pretty easy to get. Let's say like the F off of
Right.
the low B flat. So your octave key F. What you do is you just slur from you're blowing that F, but you're holding down a low B flat, right?
Mm-hmm.
You basically slur to a low B,
Okay.
and then all of a sudden you're playing an F sharp.
Mm-hmm.
Then you slur to a C, you slur to a C sharp, you slur to a D, and then all of a sudden you're playing that note, the A off of the low D that everybody has a really hard time with,
Right.
but it's really easy to get there. So instead of trying to jump from overtone to overtone,
Yeah.
you're just walking up by half step. And you can go from the D again to the low B flat, and all of a
Right.
sudden you've hit that B flat. And
Mm-hmm.
so you're talking about like getting from the B flat up to a higher D.
Right.
And so what that would mean would be you'd start like if you can get the B flat out, play the B
Yeah.
flat, and then you'd move to a B. So you got a double B, and then a C, and then a C sharp. And then you move from there, either the C sharp, you move down to a low B flat again to
Right.
get this D natural off. And that may work for some people. Or you
Mm-hmm.
might just go to a D natural. The trouble is the higher it goes on the saxophone, the weirder the overtones get. And so it gets
Right.
really awkward and the intonation gets squirrely. But
Mm-hmm.
if you find yourself just noodling around chromatically, just seriously, just moving up and down, just steps and half steps, you find yourself more comfortable in certain ranges.
Right.
And so you don't have the difficulty of jumping from a B flat straight to a D or from the Fs all the way up to the B flat
Right.
because you're only moving by half step, which is much more comfortable for your face.
Right. Of course. And then how? I just had a mental block when I was going to ask you this question, but
Oh, yeah.
so if you manage to get the D out chromatically, right, and then
Yeah.
you're kind of getting that on a consistent basis,
Yeah.
are you trying to kind of memorize like going back to what you said before, the feeling of that D, and then
Yeah.
eventually being able to kind of pull it off in more of an arpeggiated fashion?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you've sort of struck the heart of it there. Like, because like it's okay, it's easy to like sustain these pitches, but
Mm-hmm.
attacking them is real hard.
Right.
And that's why it's the most frustrating thing in the freaking world when you're starting to play this stuff and you're like, and
Right.
it's just not coming out,
Yeah.
and you want to throw your horn out the window and
Mhm.
it just sucks and everybody wants to quit.
Yeah.
Um, it's really frustrating to practice something that you never ever get right.
Right, exactly.
And so that's my main thought with the whole, just if you can get it out in some way,
right.
you can learn how to do it well. That's like, so the first time that a student's able to do this, they're like, oh, I finally did it. And I didn't do it in the way that I was hoping to do it, but I
Right.
did it. It's just like the most encouraging thing in the world. And that's what keep people moving forward. So transitioning over your question to attacking it, right?
Mhm.
This is hard. And this is something that I'm trying to understand myself a little
Okay.
bit better right now. Like, this is where a lot of my thoughts are. What I'm doing is like, okay, I think that if we just get to the place where you get up to that pitch that you can't get, you're walking up to it chromatically and you just hold it, just hold on to it. And maybe it's the sort of thing like, that, the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hour rule, the
Yep. Absolutely.
Eric Anders or whatever the guy's name is.
Yep.
If you could apply that in a small principle, like let's say that in order to play your D natural above the double B
Hmm.
flat, let's say you just had to get up to that pitch and hold it, and your body had to physically produce that pitch for a cumulative hour and 20 minutes. So
Okay.
if I get up there, and I'm holding onto it, and I stop, and I'm like, all right, that was 4 seconds.
Right. Right.
Cool. Like, I'm willing to bet that if you reached a cumulative hour and 20 minutes,
Yeah.
you'd probably be able to attack it. Now, it's going to take you a month and a half,
Right.
and
Right.
it's going to be, and at a certain point, it's going to be really, really frustrating. But, and I don't want to branch too far off, but this has to do with practice techniques. And if you're expecting to fix something today, or if you're
Right.
expecting to fix something in a month, those are very different things. And you can really screw yourself over or really make your practice a lot more comfortable and encouraging by spreading it out. So that's one thing, just simply holding onto it and getting used to holding onto it until your face is so comfortable with it
Right.
that it can attack it. The other thing I would say is get up there, hold the pitch, and start going ooh, 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 ooh. Not with tongue, just a
Okay.
constant
So an
free
air
air.
attack.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because and this is the really crazy thing. Do you teach? Like you've got
Yes.
students?
Yes. Yep.
All right. So have you ever hit some of these you get to the place where you're doing these overtones with the kids and they're like, I can't do it. And then you're like, yeah, we'll just play it. I'll play it with you and you join me. Then
Hmm.
you play it and then they can play it. But
Yeah.
then when you don't play, they can't.
Right.
And you've got the physics of sympathetic vibrations
Right.
going
Right.
on because you've got like this wavelength is actually moving their horn and shaking it in a tiny way.
Yeah.
If I do that, if I get up there, I'm going ooh 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 ooh. Really, the room is still reverberating with that pitch,
Wow.
and so I'm practicing attacking it. But I've got training wheels on because there's this extra,
Hmm.
this note is still happening in the room, and
Right.
so it's easy for me to piggyback on it,
Oh man,
and
that's
so I can
great.
practice that. Yeah, so that's what I would do, and that gets you comfortable, and that'll really start telling you if you're aiming properly
Right.
because it's all about aiming with the tongue. Like if you can get your tongue activated so that it actually is aiming at each of these individual points on the sax, then life is going to get easier.
Yeah, and I
And
love that. I love that 10,000 hour thing, like in a different way, because that's really what it is, right? I mean, these changes are
yeah,
so small to hit the different pitches. It's like you really do have to spend this incredible amount of time.
it's so frustrating. It's
Yeah.
so frustrating. And it's like, and that's the other thing. Like you got to be like really, you got to be cool with yourself and
Right.
you got to be okay with it being wrong. And you have
Right.
to be okay with your students. And I know of a teacher who will not be named,
Hmm.
who would regularly get frustrated and would just yell at his students when they
Wow.
weren't getting these things out. And it's just like that's the mark of a terrible educator. It's
Right.
like
Right.
just have some understanding and like to that effect, like have some understanding with yourself too.
Of
It's like
course.
if it's frustrating for you and you're working with a student and your student's getting frustrating, you're going to be like really encouraging. It's like, all right, just take a while. Just if it's
Right.
hard, be okay with it being hard. And you got to be okay with that yourself too. So
Yeah, definitely. And I always say that to my students when sort of I can play something that they're trying really, really hard to play and they can't get it. I said the only difference between you and I right now is that I subjected myself to so many hours of just
yeah,
kind of like if you heard me practicing, you would think I was a crazy person.
that's
And
right.
that's really the only difference I feel like a lot of the time.
100%. Yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
well, that's great. So,
Yeah.
so transitioning a little bit off of like the overtone slash voicing thing and how that kind
Yeah.
of transfers into
Hmm.
playing altissimo, is there a
Yeah, yeah.
natural like transfer point where you suddenly start to say to your students like, okay, I think we're really getting a handle on the control that's needed. Now I want to start, working on some altissimo stuff with you. What's kind of the first stuff
Right
that you
on.
would give a student?
Yeah, for Altissimo. See, a lot of times, when a student comes in, they've got some like, there's a little bit of a backstory in some way. So they might
Hmm.
have, excuse me, they might have like, they've been playing like Creston Sonata or something like that. So they've
Right.
got to get that G out and they've been
Hmm.
trying, or they some other punk in their band squealing out an altissimo E, and
Right.
so they've learned how to, put their teeth directly on the
Yeah.
reed and just get this horrible, horrible noise out, right? So part
Right.
of it is just training them that it's like it's not, these things are connected. Like Overtones and Altissimo are kind of the same thing.
Right.
A really, really super cool concept is that if you examine any Altissimo fingering, what you're going to find is that it actually is an overtone fingering with extra fingers added to either make it more stable or
Right.
more in tune.
Yep.
So like any overtone fingering, any Altissimo fingering at all, it's just like, all right, this is just an overblown B natural,
Right.
but I'm adding side B flat, so it raises it up into pitch, and I'm adding this finger over here to make it more stable. So I mean, if you get your people working on overtones, just quietly, generally as part of a warm up, you know, and that's going to be good for their sound. It's going to be getting their tongue used to it. Yeah, I should say this too. There is an exercise that bridges the gap very, very well, and that is doing a pitch bend starting on your palm keys. So a lot of people are used to using like the front F and just doing this pitch bend that goes down. What you want to do is I'll start on a D and I'll go and I'll just get I'll do it twice, so it'll go quickly the first time, and the second time, and I'll hold on to it, and then I'll bring it back up.
Okay.
So what this does, and you really got to clarify because there's a difference between bending pitch with your lips and your jaw, like bending down,
Right.
and then doing this thing
Right.
with your tongue. And so if you're playing it, if you hear somebody playing it, you'll be able to tell the difference. And also, if your chin is staying put and it's not moving at all,
Okay.
but your pitch is bending, you're doing it correctly.
Right. Okay.
And that's getting the tongue sort of flexible and freed up so that as it goes higher and higher. And I'll do that start on D, they'll do it on E flat, and then on E, going up step by step, a couple of pitches each time. And the higher it goes, the easier it is to bend, but the easier it is to crack as well.
Right.
And so I have people start doing that. And honestly, if they can do that pitch bend and get this weird sort of billy goat noise out, and it's always hilarious because it sounds so ridiculous, and somebody sticks their head in the practice room like, what on earth are you doing? Like, why is this, like, and I'm like, trust me, this is super important.
Right.
And
this is scientifically proven to actually do something.
Yeah. You're exercising. It's a flexibility exercise,
Right.
and so it's not like you're going to be doing specifically this, but like if I do this, my tongue wakes up and starts aiming for each of these 1,000 little positions that it's going. Right. It's going through at the time.
Wow.
So that is probably the pitch bend thing. And the wedge key thing are probably the two most useful exercises that I know for getting people to do what they need to do with the Altissimo. So normally if they can do the pitch bend, Altissimo is going to come out.
Right.
And if they can get front fingerings out, like that front F, the front E, a lot of times people have trouble with that, or the front F sharp, or you use the front F, but you put down your side B flat key on it as well. And so a lot of times people need to just be patient, spend time with the front fingerings, and do that. The other thing I would say is don't articulate any of this stuff. Don't use your tongue, because sort of getting back to that Y syllable thing, and this is super technical. So if your listeners are like not saxophone players directly,
I think people are really going to appreciate this for sure.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
All right. So like the back of your tongue, you got to split your tongue into bits. So like.
Right.
The mid back of your tongue is doing this ya vowel shape, but the very tip of your tongue is supposed to articulate. The trouble is that like if you're not watching on YouTube, like my hand, I'm like the front of the tongue is like the fingers, and the back of the tongue is like my forearm. And the trouble is that people like start articulating, and the whole tongue basically does this, and it wallops the entire tongue up and down. So the part that is doing the voicing, the middle of the tongue, starts wobbling the second you start articulating, which immediately throws you out. Like the note's not going to work because you tried to articulate, but instead of just moving the tip of the tongue to articulate against the reed, you're moving the middle of the tongue, the part that needs to be doing its thing.
Interesting.
So slur is where it starts with.
Okay. And then how do you start to incorporate the actual articulation back into it? Because at some point, obviously, we need to have a little bit of flexibility there.
Yeah, right on. Well, start by articulating high Fs and high F sharps.
Okay.
If you can go ta, if you can attack it, ta, and not a ta, but like a la, like a super duper light. Because if you tongue it too hard, those high notes are not going to come out. But you can tell with somebody if they can, and start on like a D. You could probably articulate a D.
Right.
articulate an E flat, articulate an E. Somewhere around here, you're probably going to start falling off. It's going to get a
Right.
and you're going to get that low note out, and you're going to ask them, all right, feel your way through. What does
Mm.
the low note feel like when it, what is, like, you're playing that F, and it comes out with this at the beginning, but then it goes to the right note.
Hmm.
What does it feel like when it's playing right? What does it feel like when it's playing wrong?
Mm.
Try to attack it with the right feel on. And they're like, oh, I got to tighten up my lip. And you're like, yeah, exactly. You've started relaxing because you're thinking about your tongue.
Right.
And immediately you're starting to relax all this embouchure stuff here. So you've got to use a little bit more pressure.
Okay.
And you've got to aim. So, and then back to that whole 10,000 hour thing. After
course.
a while, they get used to feeling where it feels.
Yeah.
And so then you tell them, all right, you got to tongue as lightly as you can. And then baby steps into it. So start with the front F and articulate that. Then the front F sharp. And then the front G, the Altissimo G.
Mhm.
And start articulating those things. You can do Altissimo scales, and I'll give that to people sometimes too. And those will just use front fingerings, and it'll just go up to like a G sharp or an A.
Right.
And that's it. And don't try to get out of any ridiculously super high stuff. Like, just get
Yeah.
good at articulating like your regular high range.
Okay.
Like, if you still crack every time you tongue a high F sharp on your regular, like your F sharp key F sharp, then you probably want to clean that up before you start articulating Altissimo.
Yeah,
because
that makes total sense.
it's only going to get harder, right? So
Right.
start where the problem becomes present, but where it's a little bit easier to do what you need to do.
That's awesome, man. That gives me so many things to think about.
Cool.
One last question about this whole thing is,
Yeah.
obviously, the bulk of everything that you're talking about, that we've been talking about for the past little while, is us, like the physical shape of the oral cavity and all this different kind of stuff that we're doing. But obviously, I mean, equipment is important, right? So do you steer your students like down the road of certain equipment, certain reed strengths, or is it again a type of thing where like you're really diagnosing how they play and what would be good for them? But I imagine that you give your students some advice there. Is there any general advice you can give to people that you haven't heard play?
Yeah, definitely. Make sure your horn is in good working condition.
Right.
That always helps. It's a lot of really basic stuff. So like the reed that you're playing on, if it's too soft, this high stuff, this Altissimo, is not going to come out.
Right.
It just won't. So you got to sort of evaluate whether or not you're playing on good equipment. Good general rule: if a reed is soft, the low notes will come out easy, like low C's and B's, your spatula keys down there, and then the high notes are going to have a harder time coming out.
Right.
Hard reeds, the opposite. High notes will sound really pretty, but they'll be really airy, and you'll feel like you're pushing too hard on the low stuff.
Right.
I have a lot of my students, and again, I'm predominantly classical player, so for classical playing, I have people play on the Van Doren AL3 a lot, and I played on that for like 15 years. I'm playing on a Selmer S90 180 tip opening right now, and I love it. I love this piece. The AL3 for alto playing is limited when it comes to really high altissimo. It can play altissimo okay, but like I feel like something like a C star is sort of like a driving a Ferrari, where if you accidentally tap the gas just a little bit, this thing is going to leap forward.
Yeah.
So it's like it's really hard to control, but you can do a whole lot with it. And AL3 is like driving your mom's Honda Accord, which has no pickup, and like so no matter what, it's gonna do something safe and really predictable.
Right.
Nice thing about AL3 is that it makes people make a really good sound very, very quickly. It is a little bit more limited. It puts your sound in a box. It is the anti-jazz. Never use an AL3 for jazz playing. It sucks all the swing out of the room.
Yeah.
It's just really, you're not going to be able to manipulate the sound in the way that you want.
Right.
Something like a C star is going to send you all over the place. So you can play some really high altissimo off a C star. The S90 I really like. And it's it's let me do pretty much everything that I want right now. I've been on that for about a year and a half now, and I really like it. Different jazz pieces are going to respond differently, and I don't know enough about the construction of mouthpieces. I've had a few great conversations recently, so I'm starting to get some understanding for like how mouthpiece construction affects sound, but I'm not going to say anything.
I hear you.
I don't know enough about it.
Yeah.
I would say that, like, normally I have my students using for classical playing. I really like Van Doren V12
Okay.
reeds, and I use a size 3, and a
Hmm.
lot of my students do too. A lot of them are using the new D'Addario reserve reeds, which are actually terrific and
Okay.
extremely consistent. So like
Cool.
every D'Addario reserve reed is going to play pretty much like every other one, and they're going
Wow.
to play awesome right out of the box.
That's
And
incredible.
so yeah, it's really cool. I don't mind the discrepancies that happen in like Van Doren V12s. The blue box has got a lot of discrepancies,
Yeah.
and so it's harder to get a read that you like.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I so my students are playing that. Some of them are playing on these Leger reeds, the
Hmm.
plastic reeds, and
Yeah.
that's okay too. If I can't tell you're playing on a plastic reed, I'm okay with
Then
it.
it's okay. Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. Yeah, and I normally leave this decision up to my students, but if they have a crappy sound, they're going to know, and I'm going to make life miserable for them until they've
Right.
got a good sound.
That's
So
great.
I'm not so much a purist with regard to equipment, but I do have a range of like favorites that I go
Hmm.
through and I encourage people towards. So yeah,
Awesome. Well,
yeah.
man, this has been information packed, 45
That
minutes to an hour here. And I'm sure
yeah.
everybody out there has a lot of stuff to think about. And I think we might just have to have you back at some point in the future to talk about this more or something else.
I'd
But
love it, man. Yeah.
yeah, I just really want to thank you for your time and thanks for shedding some light on this really important topic for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a blast.
And is there a way that people can get in touch with you? What's the best way for people to reach out if they want to ask any questions or anything like that?
Yeah, probably. I mean, Instagram's a great place.
Cool.
So my handle is Gelok with 4 E's, Geeelok. I've never actually had to say that out loud.
Yeah, right.
Um, all right. Well, you can visit. I don't actually have a personal website. I'm
Okay.
gonna hopefully work on that over the summer. But you can go to HoustonSax.com
Okay.
and you can get in touch with me through there. That's Houston Underground competition, the high school competition I was mentioning earlier today. Those are probably the easiest ways to track me down.
Very cool. All right. Well, thanks
Yeah.
a lot, Dan.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.